Picking up on that theme, talking a little bit about the macro scale of innovation, I'm going to talk a bit about the micro scale, which is intrapreneurship, because fundamentally that's what intrapreneurship is, right? I see it as a paradigm of allowing individuals and small groups of individuals to drive change. That could be organizationally, could be socially, but ultimately what it allows individuals to do is to achieve things that at the start of the journey they never thought was possible. And that's kind of what drives me through all these different things with intrapreneurship. It's why I set up a charity in this space. It's kind of what really drives me, is this idea of individuals can drive change, and they can drive change they never thought was possible. To pick up on that, I'm going to share with you 3 thoughts and then a bit of theory on intrapreneurship. So the first thought is this, which is that intrapreneurship is a process, not an outcome, which differentiates it from other approaches to corporate innovation. I think one of the things in the innovation space that's always annoyed me a little bit is that so many of the things that you read out there, so many of the theories, so many of the books describe the end state, or they describe innovation as a, let's get some more innovation, that kind of substance, that thing, that's the end point. Whereas I disagree. I think it's a transition, it's a process. And when you realize that, you say, well, how do we get from state A to state B? We've got lots of books out there that say we should be more like startups, we should be more like the Ubers and the Facebooks of the world, but fundamentally, how do we get from A to B? And I think intrapreneurship is a clear methodology that organizations can follow that takes you through that journey from A to B. This is something I call the IDA model. She's a lovely lady. IDA is a 3-stage transition that tells you about innovation transitioning from one state to another. So historically, companies had this model of what I call small I, small d. Small I being a limited number of ideas that can be generated, small d being a limited number of ideas that can be delivered. And that model was based on the idea that you have an innovation team, right? It's like, let's be innovative. Let's create a small team of people that are kind of innovating in a dark cupboard somewhere in the organization. There's 5 or 6 of them. They walk in their chinos and so forth, and they are innovative, and we are therefore innovative. The problem with that is that limits the amount of innovation and delivery you can have based on the number of people in that team. And historically, what people then did was either spend a lot of money to bring a lot more people in to upskill that team, or try and increase the quality of the people in that team. But fundamentally, you're still restricted by the number. You then move to a model that I call big I, little d, which is companies said, well, let's look at the idea generation mechanism and ask all the people in our organization, do you have any great ideas? And that's cool from an employee engagement perspective, but from the delivery perspective, you've still got that little d, because it's still going to get funneled back into the innovation team ultimately, or the product development team, to deliver to market. The quality might increase, yes, but ultimately your delivery is still fairly small. What I think intrapreneurship allows you to do is to go to big I, big D, little e. And what that is the idea that if you can train everyone in your company that comes up with those ideas to be able to deliver them, to act and think like entrepreneurs and take them to market, that removes some of the restrictions of the small I, small d, and even the big I, little d kind of equation. What you then have is the little e, which is that your innovation team become the experts, right? They're the people that you draw down on for your expertise and kind of support all your individuals in the organization that are going out and trying to act entrepreneurially. And just to kind of add a bit of clarity to that as well, current state, this triangle or arrow here represents intrapreneurship, moves to what we call a startupified, VC-ified state. What does that mean? It means that the company moves to a point where it can think and act more like a startup, and when it finds good ideas, it can act like a VC because it can double down on the ones that are good, and it can ignore the ones that are less good. It's kind of a spray and pray thing, but that's the VC model. Thought number 2. Innovation programs can think bigger than innovation. I think the traditional paradigm of innovation is let's fund new products. That's all well and good, but I think that if you just do that, then you'll never fully realize your innovation potential, because people that are behind those products don't actually have the training to deliver them. So it's like, let's have some shiny new products in a company. Great. People haven't been trained to deliver those, so they don't necessarily deliver. That also unlocks a whole array of extra benefits for your company, from employee engagement to leadership development through to talent retention. leading to the fundamental point that you need to incorporate people into your innovation program. Thought 3, and this is where the title of my talk comes in, that intrapreneurship is the art of thinking inside the box. I know Chris and I had some dialogue about this beforehand, but I think one of the examples of innovation BS is this whole statement around everyone in our company thinks outside the box, or we as a company think outside the box. A, what does that really mean? B, what is the box? And C, actually from an intrapreneurship perspective, what you're telling people to do is think inside the box from the point of perspective of understanding the internal processes, how they can navigate those, and therefore how they can deliver. And fundamentally, you can take that further and say, actually, we now know how to change the processes because we intrinsically understand them in such a way that allows this company to innovate faster, which then allows you to change the box. Okay, so those are my 3 thoughts on intrapreneurship. This is one of the very few images that I could get that's brand approved that's actually not terrible, so that was a good start for me today. And that led me from those 3 thoughts to what I call the intrapreneurship equation, which is that intrapreneurship equals innovation plus people plus impact if it's social entrepreneurship, which we'll talk a bit about later on, times corporate scale. Or put succinctly, it's crowdsourced, people-focused innovation, which I think is different to the general paradigms and patterns of innovation that we've seen previously and answers to the questions that Chris spoke about earlier on. But then what is intrapreneurship? What are the definitions of it? A guy called Gifford Pinchot actually came up with the term back in the 70s, so it's not a new idea. And he initially described it as a person within an existing organization who takes direct responsibility for turning an idea into a profitable finished product through assertive risk-taking and innovation. There's a shorter definition I'll come to in a minute, which is better, but I put up a few logos on here just to describe how this kind of appears in action. So you've got entrepreneurial deliveries from Google, the Gmail, for example, 3M, Post-it note, Vodafone and Pacer, which we'll talk a little bit about later on. You've also got some examples of companies that perhaps, no names mentioned, didn't have an entrepreneurship program, but had great ideas in the company and then failed because they didn't listen to those ideas that were already present. This is the better definition of entrepreneurship, as I think, which is that entrepreneurs are the dreamers who do. And I think that's quite poetic, it's quite nice. These are some examples, as I've just gone through, of kind of products that came directly out of entrepreneurs and social entrepreneurs, billion-dollar companies out there. These ideas unlocked revenue, massive scaled revenue, just by a pattern of listening to the people that were already in the company. And I think that that is just a real shame for many companies, that if you don't listen to the people that you already have, not only are you potentially leading to market failure, but you're actually leading to a point where you're not unlocking massive amounts of revenue. And then why is that important? So Richard Branson, relatively successful businessman, put the fact that Virgin is now something like 200 companies down to the fact that they had a constant stream of entrepreneurs. You've got the fact that social entrepreneurship particularly is seen as a really powerful way of managing talent, because actually it touches many of the key drivers and motivators for individuals, namely the ability to get better at stuff, the ability to do things your own way, and the ability to do things that have wider purpose than just the 4 walls of the office that you're in. And then there's the 2 things here around innovation and culture, which kind of wrapped up together, because entrepreneurs can drive cultural change that makes an organization more innovative. And there's loads of research out there that shows that entrepreneurs become really powerful change agents within an organization, something that academics call institutional entrepreneurs. And they get really good at getting shit done, fundamentally. Can that be extended? And I think yes, it can, which is that you then add the social angle to it, which is where my original passions began around entrepreneurship, which is that why not take that pattern of individuals acting as entrepreneurs and say, why not create ideas that actually solve social problems profitably? And that originally kind of sounded kind of pie in the sky, a little bit fluffy. But actually, when you look at it, social impact or social problems are just business opportunities in disguise, and people miss that. And when people switch off at times because you're trying to present something to them, saying, this can solve homelessness, this can solve inequality, this can solve water poverty. Actually, all these things are just opportunities for solutions. And it's also shown that there's a $12 trillion market for solving the Sustainable Development Goals, which are the UN's 17 key goals for humanity. There's 88% of millennials find jobs more fulfilling when they're given clear social impact and relevance. Spend in this market is moving more towards sort of sustainability and consciousness, although people sometimes say one thing and act differently, so those stats are always a bit questionable. And finally, and most importantly, you're seeing that the financial book value of companies that have clear social impact or have integrated social relevance to their business model have multiples that are higher, have profit margins that are higher. And I think that that is an incredibly powerful message, because if you as a company can listen to your people in a way that also makes the world a better place and drives profit, then that's just a really neat way of doing business. A couple of examples of that. I won't give mine because you've already seen my ugly mug, but the two on the left-hand side. Gib Bullock, a guy at Accenture, famous social entrepreneur, created Accenture Development Partnerships, discounted consultancy services to the third sector, which increased the retention of top performers at Accenture by over 30% over a 10-year period, bearing in mind that every time you lose a top performer, you then have to train new people and recruit them. There's quite a heavy cost there, something in the region of £30,000 per rehire, and did that in a way which raised 300,000 households out of poverty. So profitably doing good, doing well, and doing good. Secondly, you've got M-Pesa, which is a guy called Nick Hughes at Vodafone. That now raises close to close to £500 million a year in terms of turnover, and actually the 29.5 million customers that it now has, the vast majority of those were unbanked beforehand. If you're unbanked, you can't get credit history, you can't come into the formal sector, you don't have the ability to securely transfer money. So actually this again raised loads and loads of people out of poverty, and again is a really cool example of social entrepreneurship, social innovation, doing well and doing good. I'll leave on that note of saying that wouldn't it be cool if we all lived in a world where people could go to work and feel like they could express themselves through their careers and in such a way that it could actually make the world a better place. That's certainly one of the things that's always driven me to get more involved in this. It's less about the pure innovation side of it, more that moment when you talk to people and you give them the opportunity to work on things that they care about and understand later on that if you work on something that you personally buy into, you can deliver things that, as I said earlier, you never thought were possible. We have in this building actually on the 17th of April a free day-long masterclass where I can drone on about these things all day. It's a bit more interactive, so don't worry. So if you do want to come to that free session, then talk to me at the end or drop a note to intrapreneurship@barclays.com. That's me for now. I hope you found that interesting with regards to intrapreneurship. Before we move into the panel section, I'd like to invite Sam up to give you a live entrepreneur pitch. Sam.